Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Learn to think like a scammer to improve your cyber safety skills. My name is Benedict Schöpflin. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Network. I have the great pleasure of co-hosting this webinar with Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario and Rayanne Rideout, who is their Director of Partnerships. Rayanne's voice is a little hoarse today, so this is why I'm taking the hosting duties on. And today we are welcoming two speakers from KnowledgeFlow Cybersafety Foundation, Claudiu Popa and Debra Popa, who are going to tell us more about recent programs they have developed to help you develop your cyber safety skills. But before we get to this, I just wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge that we all gather on the traditional territories of a number of First Nations, and we wish to acknowledge their stewardship of this land throughout the ages. We seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land, one that is based in honor and in deep respect. You know this, but it never hurts to repeat it. All microphones are muted automatically to preserve the quality of the sound during this webinar because the webinar is being recorded. You do have two options to share your thoughts and your questions with us. You will have a chat box on one side of your screen where you can post comments during the session. You can let us know where you're connecting from. You can engage with each other. And then there's a Q&A box, which you can access at the bottom of your screen. And if you click on that, you can type your questions for our presenters. We're going to wait until the end of their presentation, and then we'll go through your questions and address them live. So you will get an answer. So stick with us until the end. If you are in need of the ASL interpretation, we have two ASL interpreters today. They're visible on your screen, and you should be able to adapt the size of your screen and how you view the little windows with the interpreters by using the grid at the top right corner of your screen. So that allows you. Closed captioning is also available if you wish to turn it on to be able to follow along. We have, I know it's not anyone's favorite activity, but it is very useful for us and very welcome. We have an evaluation, and we always appreciate your feedback on what you've gained from these webinars. So you will see at the end of our webinar a little pop-up on your screen with a link that will take you to a survey. And we will also send you a follow-up email in about a day that will contain the same survey link. If you can take a few minutes to respond, that would be wonderful. It tells us how we're doing, and it allows you to share thoughts about what you think we could be addressing in the next webinar. And then finally, as I mentioned, our webinars are recorded, and once they are uploaded to YouTube and added to both our websites, which would be Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario's website and CNPEA's website. I'll share those links repeatedly in the chat box throughout the session. So similarly, we'll be sharing a PDF of the slides. So that is something you can count on. And then finally, we want to do a reminder. This is a public forum. Even though we cannot see your faces, your names are visible. And so we encourage you strongly to not share personal circumstances or issues during the session. We are trying to keep to a commitment to maintain your privacy and your confidentiality. So we will be, of course, taking questions from the audience, but please do not share any personal details about a personal circumstance. If you wish to discuss this with somebody, we invite you to contact EAPO directly after this webinar, and we can set up something so you can have a confidential conversation. And for those of you who are new and do not know our organizations, Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario is obviously based in Ontario and envisions in Ontario where all seniors are free from ageism and from abuse, and where human rights are advanced, protected, and respected. All of their activities are mandated to support the Ontario strategy to combat elder abuse. And in the case of CNPEA, which is the Canadian network, we are the Pan-Canadian, the sole Pan-Canadian network that is focused on elder abuse and neglect in Canada. And our work is really to improve awareness, supports, and capacity to have a national coordinated approach to these issues. Obviously, we promote the rights of seniors through knowledge mobilization, collaboration, policy, and education. And we tend to do webinars such as this quite often, usually in tandem with EAPO, and we're very glad that you're joining us. And now moving on to our presenters who are visible on your screen now, I would like to introduce Claudiu Popa, who is the founder of KnowledgeFlow Cybersafety Foundation. He's a recognized leader in the cybersecurity field, holds several top-tier certifications in the topic, and has dedicated his career to advancing cybersecurity education and promoting online safety for individuals, for organizations, and for communities. We are very excited to have him here today. And with him, Debra Popa, who is the executive director of KnowledgeFlow Cybersafety Foundation, who is also deeply passionate about protecting Canadians from any form of digital threats. She combines strategic leadership with personal commitment to ensure that populations that are more vulnerable, particularly older people, are equipped with the knowledge and the tools that they need to stay safe online. So her dedication drives the organization's mission, which is to create accessible and effective cyber safety resources to empower people and communities to navigate the digital world securely and confidently, something which we all need. And I believe at this point, I'm going to mute myself and let Claudiu and Debra take over with their presentation.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Benedict and Rayanne. I'm going to share my screen and hope that the technology cooperates. You can see everything okay?
Yes, we can.
Looks good. Okay. And our mission is to make Canadians unhackable, which sounds like a huge mission, and it is. We try to make sure that everybody from as soon as a young kid, plays on an iPad for the first time, all the way up to older Canadians who might be online banking or online shopping, newcomers who are just arriving in Canada. We try to make sure that everybody has access to free and industry certified expertise so that they can participate online freely and securely. So that is us. I'll skip over this one because Benedict did such a lovely introduction. So this is our website. We have an event page. So like Benedict was saying, if you want to see the materials afterwards, don't feel like you have to remember anything as we're talking or feel like you have to take notes. The materials will be shared. And if you want to jump over to our webpage, you can see other events that we're doing. There might be something local to your area, and you can maybe join us in person at a future event. So two of the most recent projects that we wanted to highlight before we get into some of the specific cyber safety training, we have a current project called Project KnowledgeNet. And this one we're really excited about because it is designed by seniors for seniors. And what we love about this is we're actually phishing you. So if you sign up for this online course, you will receive harmless, but still phishing emails right directly in your inbox. And the goal is to see if you can detect them. And then each week you get a follow-up that shows what the previous week's phishing email was and the signs that you hopefully spotted. And if you didn't, it teaches you what those red flags are. So we are having such fun with this. I regularly scam my cousin. She falls for it every time. So feel free, jump in, join this course, because I think you'll find it really interesting and really effective. To do so, if you jump over to our site, knowledgenet.knowledgeflow.org, specifically to sign up for this project, and you'll recognize this screen. If you do get caught by one of our phishing emails, you'll receive this screen on your site, on your browser, and you'll know that you fell for one of our, like I said, they're all harmless. We don't actually collect your personal information, but you'll get that on your browser and you'll know that you've been caught. So it's a lot of fun. So feel free to sign up for that one. We'd love to have you join us. The other project that we've just launched is Project KnowledgeLink. And in this case, what we're doing is creating a team of senior ambassadors to go out into the community and host, coffee chats, or maybe it's a get together with a church group or a community group that they're already part of, and to become kind of the cyber safety expert among their group of peers. So people who volunteer with us, they get some initial training from us, and then we meet monthly to go over a topic of the month, answer questions, prepare those seniors to go out and help their peers. So that's a really fun one as well. So if you and you can sign up for that project. The other thing we wanted to highlight is we have lots of free stuff on our site, lots of free courses. So if you go to knowledgeflow.org and then click on Academy, you'll go to our LMS, our learning management system, and you make an account, and there's a whole bunch of free courses. We highly recommend taking the first one called Cyber Safety for Everyone, and it covers everything from protecting your device to protecting your information, how to spot scams, and there's lots of fun interactive activities included in that course. So please take advantage of the free course. Okay, so now we're gonna jump into teaching you how to think like a scammer. And we decided to do it this way. This past summer, we took our kids to Paris. And why am I telling you this? Because one of the first things you hear when you tell people that you're going to Paris is they say, watch out for pickpockets. So that's great that you now know that there are pickpockets, but unless you know how the pickpockets, it's an organized gang. It's not one individual, that maybe there's a scammer standing on the platform who scouts the targets, and it's somebody else who does the pickpocketing, and then it's handed off to someone else again. So unless you know kind of how that whole scam plays out, you don't really know how to defend yourself. So we've created a course which will turn you into expert scammers. Claudiu's going to walk you through it. We're going to give you 10 lessons on how to be an expert and the pitfalls that befall the scammers to thwart their scams. So I'm going to keep doing the slides, but Claudia is going to jump in and explain how to become an expert scammer.
Thank you. And to that point, around explaining to people why they should stay away from scams and sensitizing them to the existence of scams, there's also this this visitor recording. If you go to an audio recording that yells out across the crowd, watch out for pickpockets. This does not help anybody necessarily not get pickpocketed, or we just don't have the numbers on that, but people to properly defend yourself, it's also important to think from the pickpocketer's perspective. And before you jump to conclusions, about a decade ago, I started writing a book, which ended up taking over a lot of my time, and that's the Canadian Cyber Fraud Handbook. And I used the help of graduate students to review 200 cases of digital scams and fraud and all sorts of cybercrime. And of course, this may have been traumatizing for the entire team, but we got to understand the diversity of crimes that could be cataloged and classified into different buckets, right? So helping people think about the limited choices that are available to scammers will also help people defend themselves from those. One of the key responses that I've had when I was doing research for that book was the fact that audiences, particularly seniors, always felt overwhelmed by the potential for unlimited scams. You get to the point where you don't know who this person is. They're a faceless individual. They might be calling at all hours during dinner time. or they are emailing you, or you meet them on social media and you feel like there are unlimited different possibilities and there could be thousands of people in their gang. That's not the case. We found out that there's a limited number of potential types of cyber fraud, and we limited the way that we've been teaching people based on a small number of options that criminals have. So let's see if we can think like a scammer and limit that kind of anxiety that we all get when we think that, hey, you know what? Anything's possible. How am I supposed to deal with an infinity of possible malicious scenarios? So the first thing that scammers and fraudsters have to decide is who's the audience? How do we target people? And this is where people fall into a couple of buckets. Either they say, well, I'm not interesting enough that anyone would target me, and so I'm not afraid of them because I've got nothing to hide. I'm fairly sharp, and I can tell when people target me anyway. And on the other hand, they might feel like they are individually targeted by a large number of these things, and they are coming across text messages and emails and phone and so on. So depending on where somebody falls in that on that spectrum, they will react differently. From the perspective of the criminal, that's not what it looks like. From the perspective of the criminal, they just need to decide, do we go with the elephant gun approach and just fire off these malicious messages and see who bites? Or do we pick a vulnerable person who may have at some point responded to an email and we know that they're likely to click on things? So that's a decision they have to make right off the bat. The goal is important. Generally speaking, we understand that anyone who's in the criminal business is in it for profit. We need to know, as a scammer, for example, we need to know whether we're looking to take their money right up front, or we want to impersonate them and steal their identity. And with their identity, we can have access to their money or what their identity can buy. For example, if they have a credit rating that has been set and is very high for the past few decades, then that credit rating could earn you the right to apply for a variety of products that you can buy, or open up a line of credit, or get a mortgage, or get a phone and switch a payment plan with your utility company. So depending on the comfort level of the criminal, either they're going to try to steal your money right off the bat, and in those cases, they can simply call you up and say, I'm calling from Microsoft, transfer some money my way, or they will try to get a hold of your identity by stealing one of your accounts. Okay. In most of those cases, passwords are key, but there are different tools that they have at their disposal in order to get access to those identity elements, including those passwords. So we call this choosing a vehicle because we think of this as a getaway vehicle in case of a robbery. So as a vehicle, or as a method of conducting this type of criminal activity, we're like most cyber criminals, we want to pretend that we are far away. Well, this is almost always a long distance crime. So since it's a long distance crime, they only have very few options open to them: email, phone, or text messaging. It's simple, but they don't have the option of showing up on your doorstep, for example, because they're usually in a different country altogether. And so it's important for potential victims to know this. It's important for us all to know that if we pick up the phone and we know that this is likely a scammer, that we're totally fine to hang up. for instance. If we open an email, we're totally fine to delete that email and ignore it. Same thing with text messages, and we can watch for certain dead giveaways, including the kinds of urgency that you always sense, right? So using any of these vehicles, they're going to want, or we as criminals are going to want the victims to respond as quickly and as impulsively as possible. So watch for urgency. And so as a criminal, we want to tell people that the sky's falling, they need to respond now, their account is closing, their computer is doing something terrible, and they should either send us money or give us access to their account. That's going to be their vehicle. And depending on what they choose to do, well, that's going to be how those potential victims are going to first be introduced to this criminal activity. So, as you can see, email is a cheap way for criminals, especially cheap criminals that don't want to invest in conducting these crimes. And so we saw on the previous slide that there are pros and cons to each one of these vehicles. Well, one of the cons, pun intended, of using email as a way to defraud people is the fact that email will tell the recipient when it's not quite accurate. So when you're expecting an email from, say, contact@knowledgeflow.org, something.com will instantly ring a warning bell, right? You're going to be alerted to the potential for something to not be quite right. You're not sure if these are the right people who are reaching out, right? So that's one of the shortcomings. And this is why they always put the emphasis on urgency, so that you are a little bit distracted and you don't necessarily start scanning the email and look for some of these indicators of compromise or indicators of mischief.
So the next thing we're going to do is a poll. While we're looking at this slide, we're going to put a poll in the chat, and then we'll review everybody's answers once everybody's had a second to answer that poll.
Okay, is that poll appearing now?
1 second.
I see something pop up.
There it is.
Very good. On my screen, it says, in the last week, have you been contacted by a scammer by phone, email, or text? Oh, just when I was voting, it says host or panelists cannot vote. Too bad. I can't skew the results. The previous page introduced us to the concept of typo squatting. So essentially, when it's easy to fool people with a message that looks very similar to a legitimate one, we call that typo squatting. And it's just a very, very simple thing. If somebody wanted to spell knowledge flow with a number 1 instead of an L, well, they could just register knowledgeflow.org with a number 1 instead of an L, and it would be very difficult to tell. But it's a reminder that we have to pay close attention, and we need to always I don't hesitate to zoom in to these things, right? So I'm constantly using the wheel on my mouse to zoom in and out of screens, because I can't see that well to discern the difference between a 1 and an L. But this is where it's at. Going forward, you're going to see scams that are a little bit more sophisticated. You're still going to see the unsophisticated scams, however. So don't be fooled just because you're seeing unsophisticated scams. Once in a while, the sophisticated ones end up fooling people, and they can fall for it. So there are different ways to get access to a list of victims or mark. And one of them is to simply grab the information off of the web. For example, 411.ca or any other online phone book could have some telephone numbers that are usable. There are free databases online where our phone numbers and email addresses and names are included. All of us are already on a number or a large number of lists. And when those lists fall into the wrong hands, they can be used for spam or more malicious activities such as phishing, which are essentially a type of spam that lures people with malicious links in an attempt to defraud them. Same thing with the use of ads or online forms that are used to collect personal information online, right? So once you share your personal information online, chances are it will fall into the wrong hands or even be abused by the people who are asking for it. So once you have these tools in place and your getaway vehicle, all you have to do is craft your perfect story. And of course, the perfect story begins with a narrative that could be urgent. And a little bit more than that, it also helps if it's unique. Why does it need to be unique? Because I don't want the victims to go on Google and type in my exact words and find out that somebody else has been presented with the same malicious scenario. So I want to have a little bit of a different approach to each and every target, each and every mark. And that's easy to do when you're targeting one person at a time, but difficult to do when you're targeting a lot of people at the time. And so if we're thinking about pros and cons, if we're thinking like a scammer, well, it's a lot more powerful if you target people individually, right? Now, when you pick a role, you need to embody a persona. And that persona online, you need to appear vulnerable. You need to appear authoritative. You decide if you want to be a police officer or an immigration officer or somebody looking for friendship online or somebody pretending to be looking to buy something. That's like a role-playing game for a lot of these people. And I can't tell you that a lot of them may even enjoy it. And some of the more powerful narratives that they create, you can tell that they're having fun with it, right? Because they're actually talking one-on-one with their victims. And it's not unusual that they will play the long game. In other words, they don't always have to defraud you during your first call, right? Sometimes it takes months, especially in the case of romance scams, when people get surprised that they've been defrauded. And in those cases, sometimes they're defrauded multiple times by the same person because they keep giving them another chance because the criminals have chosen that role so well and built up that story around them that it's difficult for people to think that they've been scammed. So it always comes down to emotion. It always comes down to this idea that impulse plays a part. But it's usually different kinds of emotions. In some cases, it really is, as the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre says, embarrassment. And that embarrassment causes the victims to keep going along with it. And in some cases, not even report it because they're so embarrassed. Yes, they've lost tens of thousands of dollars, but they will not report it because it's humiliating. And it was painful enough to go through it the first time, it'll be even more painful to acknowledge. So in some cases, people suffer in silence. And sadly, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre says that up to 95% of victims fail to report. Now, not reporting is one thing, but not helping other people is quite another, because it's always helpful to create that report. yes, it's true that people feel like they're becoming a number or a statistic, but if it can help other people to not fall for it, it can be really, really powerful. So we always recommend reporting. We always recommend understanding the types of emotions that can be involved, including excitement, and obviously the appeal to trust when somebody pretends to be a family member or a friend, right? They call and they say, look, I've been abducted, or I'm stuck in a foreign country, or I'm simply making friends with you on Facebook or on some other kind of social media, and you recognize their names. You don't necessarily think twice about allowing a friend that you know to connect with you, especially since their actual picture is right there. Most people don't remember the fact that those pictures are free online and they're visible by everybody. So it's very easy for someone to steal the image, create an account with the exact same name as their own friends, even though they might end up having the same friend on their friend list twice. That might not be weird to them, especially with people having sometimes dozens or hundreds of friends on their list. So that familiarity can be very powerful.
We have another poll.
Okay.
If they can put it up, it's all about emotions.
Okay, you should be able to see the second poll on your screen now. Which emotion do you think scammers rely on the most? Fear, trust, excitement, or guilt? We'll give it another 30 seconds or so for everyone to respond. Just a reminder that you can respond directly by clicking on your screen. We're not putting any link in the chat box.
In the industry, we have, and you'll notice if you see any articles that I write, I always reference an acronym that's called FUD. And FUD stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And it's a combination of a number of emotions that makes a message more powerful. And unfortunately, FUD is used not just by criminals and scammers. It's also used by advertisers and promoters. So we always warn all of our audiences, including children, to watch out for FUDdy messages.
It seems you're right. Fear ranks at the top of the votes with 53%.
Fear is a very powerful emotion, and it creates all kinds of anxiety, and people feel like they need to ask right then and there, which is why the recommendation is always take a breath, take a step back, hang up, just tell them you're going to call them back or not, but call somebody you trust. Bounce the idea of somebody else. Either way, crafting that perfect message, that perfect story has to do with the tone, the urgency, the implied forced arbitrary deadline, the technical jargon. So using technical language, which makes it sound official. So there's that appeal to authority, which influences people disproportionately. When we talk about things like password compromises or identity fraud or accounts that are being impacted, etc. And various other types of information which may or may not be real. It's very, very easy for a scammer. So if we wanted to keep on wearing this hat of a cyber criminal, it's very easy for anyone to find an email that one of the banks sends out. For example, the big 5 banks all send out regular emails to all of their customers. And just grabbing one of those messages and changing a couple of words and changing the links so that they go into our database instead of their own website makes it so that you've just taken advantage of their brand and their wording and their level of well, the degree to which they can be recognized. And that, of course, ultimately will impact their reputation. But before that happens, people could get defrauded. So it's always important to watch the things that they cannot change, which are the from addresses, for example, at the top of the email. And of course, the links, when you hover over the links, you can see that, in fact, it's going to take you someplace that you don't actually recognize. So anything like that will create suspicion, and you should never expect to be 100% confident that something is a scam. Sometimes we see things coming from our own banks that look scammy and are actually official. So I always contact them and I say, who sent this? Was this your marketing department that deliberately tried to make this look like a scam? And sometimes they say, no, that's a legitimate message from us. So that's always disappointing to see from legitimate organizations, because it lowers the degree of vigilance that people adopt. So choosing your tools is really important as a scammer, because those tools are going to be what you're going to use to get out and create or influence your audience. So if you're going to be using malware, there's lots of free viruses that can be used, which you can grab online and send them out to the entire spam list. You can use different types of caller ID spoofing to misrepresent yourself. So we've all received phone calls from numbers that look suspiciously close to our own number, right? I get them on occasion, and it literally looks like it's almost my entire phone number, except for a couple of digits at the end, to make it sound like it could be one of my neighbors, right? So that's supposed to reduce your resistance to answering or not answering, and make you trust it even as you're already answering, right? So they're already doing some of that work of convincing you to pick up the phone just by showing a number that is close to your own. And finally, those links to fake websites and attachments, which could be Word documents, they could be, again, links to websites, or they could be some other executable tool that will run on your computer. And once it runs on your computer, it's difficult to know what that software does, right? So it's difficult to know whether your computer is okay or not, because antivirus tools are never guaranteed to catch all the malware and the viruses on your computer. They just do their best. So it's always important when you do this, and many criminals think about this right off the bat. How do they accept money? Preferably money in a way that makes it less easy to trace. So traceability is important. So that's why they use gift cards and codes. So we would think about wire transfers as well. And nowadays, it's very popular to use cryptocurrency. But if you're like me, I'm less likely to pay via Bitcoin or some other kind of cryptocurrency, just because it's so difficult to do that. Of course, there are some cities that have these ATMs that transform your dollars into Bitcoin, but most people are not going to do that, and they're likely to think twice before they do. So gift cards and codes, watch for these, because they're likely to crop up around the holiday period that's upon us. And so finally, harvesting personal information is important, because that personal information can be used in the future. You can build a profile, you can create fake people on social media. So if you were to receive a scam notice from somebody, you would potentially look them up on Google. And if you see a profile on Google or on LinkedIn or on Facebook, you're likely to trust those people more. If you're stealing the information of an individual, even if they don't fall for the scam this time, you can always use that same information in the future. And if you are lucky enough as a scammer, if I was lucky enough as a scammer to find multiple sources of information about the same person, well, the more information I have, the more likely it is that I'll be able to go to the bank and do some real damage and maybe get a mortgage in this person's name. So resistance is something that I'm told a lot of young people put up. Seniors as well, most professionals, a lot of people will say, no, this will not pass. I can tell when these people, I can see them coming a mile away. And I will resist. I'm not just going to send my money willy-nilly. And then you get the occasional person who happens to be, I don't know, they've been in business decades, and they could fall for a scam that seems trivial to many of us. So each one of us has an Achilles heel. For example, I received a text message from somebody who looked like a friend, and it came from Steve. And everybody knows a person named Steve. So I just routinely clicked on it. I can't remember what it was about. It was just a quick message that said, what do you think of this price? With a link. Right? So you just quickly click, and you might cause your phone to be infected, or you might be visiting a fraudulent website. So any number of these things are possibilities. Just it's important to realize that none of us is immune. So those pressure tactics are usually around urgency, and sometimes it's also intimidation. In the past, they've also gotten rude and yelling at people and so on. That type of appeal to authority doesn't usually work when they get rude, right? Because police officers aren't likely to call you and start insulting you. But if they can feel that people are responding to fear, they will crank it up. So be aware of that, and make sure that scammers do not turn these things around and are using the conversation, are keeping that narrative going. If you're asking them questions, make sure they answer them to your satisfaction. But we don't recommend talking to scammers at all anyway. So running a long-term scam is all about the long game. Most scammers want to be in business for a long time. Ideally, they want to scam the same people over and over again. So they like to think ahead. And not only do they want to get paid, they also want the personal information. So always be careful where you disseminate your personal information. Right? So it's important for all scammers to try to remember that they need to be consistent and genuine, to not immediately blurt out that they need money, to build a relationship, and to use some of those emotional impulses that people are likely to fall for, not just fear, right? The various flavors of anxiety and anticipation. And let's not forget, there's also the appeal to greed, which a lot of people are told, look, I don't know how much disposable money, how much disposable income you have at your age, but wouldn't you want to have more? And within a year, you could save as much as you did for the past 20 years. And that appeals to people in various different segments. So it's important to not forget that that just a plain old appeal to the potential for making money will work. And that's why it's so embarrassing for people who have fallen for these scams to report them after the fact. So that's it. Real-time scamming is you're going to see phone or pop-up warnings. you're going to, well, I, as a scammer, will want as much as possible to have some kind of a way to access their computers or their phones remotely. And if my victims will open an email, I'm halfway there. I'm almost installed on their computer, right? And if I can run on their computer, then I've got control of their computer. It's no longer their computer. I've got their data and I have power. And at that point, I no longer have to maintain this facade. I can simply say, I've got your data. I can wipe it out. If you don't care, you're going to lose all your grandchildren's pictures or your own pictures or your dog's pictures or whatever document you might have. And at that point, it gets pretty real because they no longer have to pretend, and they usually have a real deadline in place. So covering those tracks, it's important that, well, VPNs can be used to hide your location. So if you know what it is that you're hiding from, well, a VPN can be useful for hiding your location. We certainly don't recommend it for using with online banking, for example. But if you're trying to pretend that you're from a different country, let's say in order to watch the Olympics, because they might look better on somebody on TV in a different country, then definitely use a VPN. But don't trust VPNs with banking information because you never know who runs those companies. Delete accounts or emails before they can be traced. Obviously, as a criminal, criminals will want to delete those accounts and emails simply because they know that somebody's going to investigate, right? It's less likely that police forces can investigate across borders, but it's possible because police forces are now able to collaborate and cooperate internationally if it's meaningful enough. So yeah, as you can imagine, different kinds of tools are useful for both sides, right? So it's just as useful for a criminal to hide their location and their identity with a VPN as it is for somebody like us who want to pretend that we're in the States so that we can watch a TV program that's in the States. These are different tools that can be abused to be used for different purposes. Common roadblocks, right? So if my scam was going to fail, it's because victims may have used unique passwords that are really hard to guess, right? So that's a reminder to all of us that we need to choose not just long passwords, which are the best. We, in fact, call them passphrases, but we always remind people to use unique passwords, never reuse them, because the places that you've used those passwords are likely to be hacked anyway. So as soon as one place gets hacked, if they have your password, the criminals will be able to reuse it. And that's a scheme called password stuffing. If I've got your password from one site, I'll try it in your Gmail, I'll try it on your bank account, I'll try it on Facebook, etc. And I might be able to steal your identity that way. If multi-factor authentication is enabled, then scammers can't get into your account, even if they have your password. So that's always a useful tool, even though it introduces that extra step. But that extra step gives you confidence. And we talked about confidence right at the beginning. And finally, in order to have passwords that are unique, they must be remembered by something. So having a trustworthy password database is important. A password database is the kind of thing that might come with your Apple iPhone, for example, and there might be some other tools that are usable by Android or by Windows users. Either way, selecting a password manager might be the most important tool that you, the most important selecting an antivirus tool, for example. Also, if we're scammers and we are pushing ads that are infected, well, ad blockers are likely to stop us. if people are not likely to click on our links, but instead they're going to saved bookmarks, well, they're likely to bypass our infected websites, right? So if people are not leaving tiny digital footprints, well, we're likely to not do very well with our scam. So think ahead and try to block those ads. Try to go to the links that you trust, not to the links that you're given in emails. And that will vastly reduce the risk for you on a daily basis. Remember, nothing reduces your risk 100%, but chipping away at that risk is really what we can all do. Your scam might also fail because spam filters are really good. I have a pretty good spam filter, but what I do when I'm not entirely sure about an email is I move it into my junk mail folder and then I open it. And when you open an email from the junk mail folder, it's a lot safer because those links are disabled. So you can always do that. Obviously, you want to hover over links so that you can get a preview. And if it looks sketchy, you don't click on it. And you also always remember to check the sender. I think this is pretty much the end of our presentation, but just your scam might also fail because people are so vigilant that they're less likely to open emails. So not opening an email when you know that it's likely to be unsolicited, that goes a long way. And it also saves you a lot of time, right? Always screen your calls. Make sure that if you're certain that somebody is a scammer or is just somebody you don't want to talk to and it's unsolicited and you know that they're going to keep on calling back, then just hang up. It's as simple as that, right? Your scam might fail for so many reasons, and that's why it's important to exercise skepticism. 3 different types. Obviously, watch for urgency, watch for that call to authority, right? Why would you get a call from immigration? Why would you get a call from your bank or the CRA or something, right? And finally, anytime somebody calls or emails you and asks for your identity information, you must push back and you must be skeptical. If they say they're from your bank, then just say, fine, I'll go to my bank branch and I will deal with it there. I'm not going to give out my information over the phone. Right? So always think like a scammer and you'll know what vulnerabilities scammers have because these are not superheroes. And in many cases, they're definitely not geniuses either. So understanding that their scams might fail, and in fact, they fail on a daily basis so many times. It's just that we always hear about the disasters. We never hear about the vast majority of scams that fail, which makes them that much more intimidating. But if we think like a scammer, then we're likely to defeat scammers.
So I think we have our final poll. Benedict can throw that up and then we can start with some questions. There we go. What will you do differently? So after this session, what will you do differently to avoid scams? So you can pick, be more skeptical of unexpected messages and calls, be more skeptical of, well, that one's in twice. Share what I learned with others, or all of the above.
The second one should say, be even more skeptical.
Be even more.
Be super, extra, super duper skeptical.
Yeah. All of the above. Good answer.
That was always the right answer on my university exams. Anytime I saw that on a university exam, always D. It's not A, B, C, it's always D. So.
Right, I'm going to share results so people can see briefly where they're at. But yeah, it seems like 80% understood the assignment and answered all of the above. I think it was a very helpful kind of shift in vision to think from the scammer's perspective and feel it less like something that terrible that happens to you, but also something that you can do to kind of stand in their way.
Important to turn the tables whenever you can.
Yes. So we have quite a few questions that came in while you were speaking. I noticed the first one that popped up immediately had to do with VPNs, and then a few more followed. So I feel like we can maybe start with that and kind of get into that a little bit. So the first question in the Q&A box was, is it always recommended to have VPN to have cybersecurity? And then the follow-up being, what exactly is a private VPN? Like, how does that work?
Oh, that's an excellent question. That's an excellent double question. I think we also got started on answering some of it. A VPN is not necessarily a pure play security tool. There's a little bit of confusion in VPNs because professionals use them for their work. So when your employer gives you a VPN to use, that is a virtual private network, which creates a direct connection into your work, into your office. There are many tools that you see on TV that are advertised as VPNs. And those VPNs are owned by faceless individuals in foreign countries. It must be understood that just because they're called VPNs, it doesn't mean that they are. The VPNs that you should use are the ones that are installed by your employer. The VPNs that you should be skeptical about are the ones that are commercial and they're advertised on TV, and you can also see them in between YouTube videos or everywhere else on the internet. And if you see too many ads, that typically means you should be using an ad blocker. But generally speaking, using a VPN is only useful in a couple of scenarios. And like I said earlier, for me, I want to watch sports that may not be viewable in Canada for whatever reason. So in some cases, I'll just get a VPN to pretend that my location has changed to, let's say, Australia just for an hour while I watch a tennis match. And that's it. But I certainly would not trust a faceless organization, privately owned, to carry my traffic to my own bank account here in Canada, right? So we don't want to do that because we really don't know what we are connecting to.
Well,
Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Well, it was, what is a VPN? How does that work? So I
Oh,
think you
well, there you
answered
go.
that.
Yep.
But that kind of leads us to a follow-up question that came up a little bit later, which was, is there a list of approved VPNs that are safe?
It's a very short list. We have a list of VPNs. We did a VPN study a couple of years ago for the KnowledgeFlow Foundation, and our graduate students did a bunch of research. They contacted all these organizations. Some of them even responded. And generally speaking, there are problems with most VPNs for the reasons that I mentioned. It's just a transparency issue. The answer is generally, it depends what you want to use it for. If you just want to watch sports from another country, you can probably use just about any VPN you want. But you shouldn't just willy-nilly go online and download a VPN, because whenever you download just about anything, there's a good chance you're going to download a virus. And so you still want to download something that is trustworthy. And so a couple of trustworthy VPN products are Proton VPN and Mullvad VPN. Anything else, you're going to have to assume the risk, and they might be okay. We just
And final question on the VPNs, there were a lot. Could criminals outsmart the implemented VPN?
Well, so VPNs by default, VPNs themselves might be the virus, right? So if you're
Right.
downloading a VPN, it could be that you're installing, like we said earlier, maybe NordVPN itself, or just something that looks like it's spelled similarly, and somebody else might download something that looks like the logo of a trusted VPN, and they're in fact downloading a piece of malware. VPNs themselves are not foolproof. We have to understand how they function, because there are ways to get into your computer and bypass the VPN, right? It's called split tunneling. That simply means part of your traffic goes through this safe encrypted tunnel, and part of the rest of the traffic is split and it goes through an unencrypted method. And so if, for example, a criminal had access to your computer through some kind of a remote access Trojan, which is also handily called a rat. If they've got a rat installed on your computer and they're seeing your screen, the fact that you've just opened up a VPN on your computer is irrelevant. They will end up seeing the screen of the VPN and they'll watch you as you're surfing the web. So it won't help you, certainly not help you that much. And that's why we have to understand why we should be using one. I use VPNs only for non-sensitive stuff.
Thank you. Now we have a few questions because everywhere now, no matter what we do online, even the most simple, legit things, you get pummeled with requests for surveys. How did we do? You know, tell us how was our service kind of thing. Or you get questions about, you know, cookies, which ones you want to allow, which ones you don't want to allow, accept all or not. So it gets a little hard to know at this point what makes you, I guess, weaker. So can you tell something like a question about how did we do survey provided by a legit business, say Shoppers Drug Mart? Are there risks related to filling out something like this?
Well, there's always the risk that you're going to be pestered endlessly with marketing messages. The fact that many organizations today are approached by data brokers is an insidious reality of our times. They will be approached by data brokers, and those brokers might say, we'll give you some money for your distribution list. And then Shoppers Drug Mart can make a business decision of whether to sell that list or share it and pretend that they're sharing it with somebody that provides value to the customer, or just plainly change their terms of service to accommodate this, knowing full well that literally nobody reads the terms of service and all of these updated terms of service that we're getting in our inboxes on a daily basis. So there's that risk. And of course, that risk comes with the even bigger risk that once sold or shared, that list is likely to get hacked and distributed very widely across the internet. And if we go to a website like Have I Been Pwned, PWNED, or just Googling HIBP will take you there, we can see just how many lists we are on that have been compromised publicly. It doesn't mean your account has been compromised. It just means you're on a bunch of lists that are now public and your data is public. So that's a risk of a kind. Now, your question around forms and this incessant need for you to identify yourself, that really comes down to the fact of whether you want to put your name right next to a request or make that request under a fake name, a pseudonym, a nickname. And in many cases, I prefer to make my requests or even give feedback. For example, for this seminar, if you have shared a good question or you appreciate the answer and you want to follow up, then by all means, enter your name. But if you just want to provide feedback, then you can provide it pseudonymously, not anonymously. That would mean that you're providing nothing, nothing in the name field. But if you just provide a nickname, in many cases, I just put my initials down. And so that's usually fine because I know that people are just looking for the data. They're looking in aggregate. Are people happy with for example, downloading an antivirus tool? They need to know who you are so that somebody else doesn't pretend to be you and then takes over your antivirus account. But in general, I'm very careful who I share my personal information with, and I try to come up with ways to not hand it out. For example, you can have a disposable email address which does not have your name in it.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's going to have a unique password, and you just use that email address every time you are signing up for online forms that are essentially meaningless. Just remember to always use a different password if indeed you are creating an account online. Right?
Okay. And so talking about creating passwords and managing passwords, we have quite a few questions around password managers. One of them is, which actually quite good, is if your computer has been compromised, passwords that are stored via Google Password Manager, will they be compromised as well?
Google password managers tend to be less secure than others for the simple reason that they often tend to be stored in the browser itself. And in some cases, there's another Google Cloud which stores your password. So I believe the password manager location is passwords.google.com. And so you have this, if your identity is stolen, if your Google account is stolen, then obviously somebody will be able to get into your password database using your essentially your identity. So yeah, generally speaking, I don't recommend the use of Google passwords, as well as remembering. So when sometimes you get a pop-up which says, do you want us to remember your password for next time? No, thank you. I'll put it in myself. Thanks very much. So generally speaking, you want to just be aware that there's a little bit higher risk to certain activities. And just if you have an instinctive understanding that the risk is likely to be higher, just avoid it altogether and type it in. Or if you have a password database, which is obviously separate from Google, your password databases will more often than not enter your password for you, which is a very handy feature, because let's say that your computer might be infected and might be reading your keystrokes as you're typing them. It cannot read them if they are being entered from your password database automatically. And that's a neat feature that most password databases have.
Okay, so Google Password Manager, not so great, but password managers in general, otherwise fairly safe.
That's right. We have a password manager study on the KnowledgeFlow website, and you can see how they rate relative to each other.
That's great, because we actually got a question about what are the most worthy password managers. So if you could pop the link to that study into the chat box for everyone, that'd be wonderful.
Very useful things. We don't recommend anyone in particular because we're vendor agnostic. But there is a very highly rated company, which happens to be here in Canada. And it's always easier when you're dealing with a local company, and it's called 1Password. The number 1 password, no space. And they're highly rated around the world. So many people recommend them, and certainly it's a trustworthy tool.
All right. We have still some time, and so many more questions have come in. So I think people are really engaged.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
We've had quite a few questions regarding cookies, on specific websites when you're asked to accept cookies. Is that safe? What does that do?
There are 2 kinds of cookies. It's just important to know there are 2 kinds of cookies. One cookie is a cookie that will recognize you when you go back to a website and says, okay, well, I don't need to log myself in each time I go to Facebook because it recognizes me. That's called a session cookie. And that session cookie is a cookie that simply lives on my computer and says, yeah, Claudiu was on Facebook 15 minutes ago, and you can let him in. Other types of cookies are third-party cookies, to which you should always say no. Why? Because these are tracking tools, and generally speaking, they're companies that will track you no matter what website you're on and where you are on the internet. So you will want to either go into your settings of your browser and find the cookie section, which is usually right next to the privacy section, and say no to third-party cookies. Or you can also use a neat little program called an add-on to your browser, and that's called Privacy Badger. And Privacy Badger is exactly a little picture of a badger. And this badger will watch out for privacy risks that might impact your web browser. And I do recommend installing it. It was created by the Electronic Freedom Foundation in the States. It's a very trustworthy nonprofit organization, and it does a good job of reducing the risk as you're surfing around the web. And it's inobtrusive.
All right. I want to go back to a question that came in earlier during your presentation about when receiving either emails or text that might be scams. Somebody wants to know, is it possible to get scammed just by responding to a text, even if there are no links or attachments in there?
So one of the most valuable things that criminals get from sending out a message is specific to text messages. One of the most valuable things that they can get is an answer. If you've replied to them, it means that you're open to something they might say. They get very excited about this because they know that if they just say the right thing or get you all curious or apologize profusely, and then they turn things around, they'll have you, and they'll try to build a fake relationship based on that. So yes, it's possible to get scammed, but not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can be infected. However, there exists malware or malicious software out there that can infect your phone just by making it ring and you not even bothering to answer. And in so doing, it could infect your telephone. But only some governments are wealthy enough to be able to afford that kind of software, right? It's typically made by a company called NSO, which has been banned from Canada. But of course, these guys can sell their software to anybody they want around the world.
Just hearing all of this is so alarming sometimes. Kind of switching gears slightly, but someone was asking if you were almost caught in a scam, so not scammed, but you almost fell for it, should you report it?
Yes, because new scams are the things that we have the least information about. It's very important to be able to tell the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre that there's a new type of scam out there, right? No, there's no need to wait until people lose $5 million or more and become victims to report it. It can be very helpful to know that there's a new flavor of an old scam, which is much more likely the case. But if truly there's a brand new scam, and you have or have not fallen for it, it's always worth sending a note to the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. You don't have to necessarily wait on hold. You can just fill out the form on their website.
Yes, it does help kind of map out where things are happening, what kinds are happening, and it can help others further down the line. So always very important to report. I think the rat thing really made an impression on people. So we have a couple of questions about that, which is, how do you find a rat on your computer? How do you detect it? Or can you even do that?
I like to have multiple layers of protection. So a lot of people just assume that getting one antivirus will protect them. Antivirus software is a guarantee of nothing. Antivirus software is doing its best to keep up with things. But again, thinking like a criminal, would you create a virus that you know is going to be detectable by every antivirus tool out there on the internet? No. They're in the span of time that we have been on the phone today, there's been about 10,000 new viruses released into the internet ecosystem. And every single one of those has been tested for detection by the antivirus tool that you currently have on your computer. It costs money and time to create a new virus. So why would they send it into the lion's mouth? What they do, the first thing that they do by creating a virus is to make sure that that virus cannot be detected by the most popular antivirus tools out there. For example, if you had a file on your computer, let's say that you've got a little file on your computer and you just open a little file on your computer, you call it virus.txt. You open it, you type the word virus in it, and you go to a website called virustotal.com. Go to virustotal.com, upload that tiny little file, and we'll check your little virus file against all of these antivirus tools. Well, this is exactly what criminals do before sending out a brand new virus that they created. They're not going to send their new baby, their new creation out where it'll get obliterated and the defenders will learn about it right away. No, they will make it undetectable first. That's why you have to have multiple layers. And so I try to have a secondary layer of antivirus because different viruses can detect different things. And those different things could be rats, remote access Trojans. For example, you might have your built-in antivirus software on your computer. On top of that, you might, what I do is I cycle through a number of secondary antivirus tools and I just uninstall them after a couple of months. And in so doing, I will allow a tool to scan my entire computer every time that I install it anew. So, for example, some of you will have heard of a tool called Malwarebytes. You go to Malwarebytes, you download it, you let it scan your computer. It'll likely offer you a trial version. It'll run for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks. And during that span of time, you get an idea of how safe your computer is. And that way you've got already 2 layers of security, right? Your computer already has a built-in firewall. You should have a firewall built into your internet router as well. And that's already 4 layers right away, right? And there's any number of ways to add to that little ladder of security that makes it that much more difficult for scammers and criminals to make their way into your computer.
Someone was actually asking about that earlier, regarding, if you have all these different layers of security and an ad blocker and add-ons, will they conflict with each other sometimes and make your life harder?
Yes. So that's why I said use the antivirus that comes with your operating system, because that gets updated all the time, right? So your operating system does all this magic in the background. Sometimes it comes up with a window that says, I need to update myself. Most of the time, it just updates itself without you knowing. But any additional antivirus tool that you sign up for has already been tested to work with the one that's built into your operating system. So that way, you're assured that there's compatibility. But if you decide to say, hey, Claudiu said that 2 layers are great, so 4 must be even better. I'm going to download 3 more antiviruses and run them all at the same time. That's not going to work. I can guarantee that. It's going to slow down your computer. It will likely cripple it to some extent, because sometimes these antivirus tools detect each other. Because let's face it, in order to detect a virus, you also need to behave like a virus. So sometimes they detect each other. So just 2 at a time is the most you can hope for.
All right. And speaking of updating systems and softwares, we often get messages asking us to update our software. But it could be dangerous because this could be a scam in some cases. It could be a fake message. How do you tell the difference?
How do you know? Exactly. So first of all, you should know what software you have on your computer, because you yourself have potentially installed it. So if your kids have installed, let's say, Zoom, Zoom, for the most part, will only update itself when you start a Zoom call like this one, which is always a pain. When people are expecting me to be on a call, Zoom comes up and says, let us update ourselves first. And I'm like, no, could we do this right after the call? No, just take it easy. It'll just take a minute. And you don't know how long it's going to take. So a lot of people might postpone the installation, and that's not a great thing. Knowing when these windows have a tendency to pop up will also help you trust them and detect the ones that should not be popping up. The important thing to remember is that the ones from your operating system should be taking place automatically behind the scenes. If they don't, you go and you start them manually. And that's what I do. I go to my little Windows icon and it says Windows Update, and I initiate the Windows Update manually so that I know that if another window pops up tomorrow, it won't be legit because I've just updated it, right? And if it is, well, if it's legit and I've just closed it, then I go back to my little handy dandy icon and I initiate it myself. And that way I know it's the right one, right? So if you don't recognize the window, close it. There's a lot of these. I see them all the time. Java wants to update itself. Close, go into Java, start it myself. Check for updates is usually under a menu on the far right. So whatever app you might be using, it's a little bit of a standard way of listing things under the rightmost menu. Check for updates. It doesn't hurt. And that way you know that you're the one asking for it. It's the same idea as scams that come in. If it's unsolicited and it's coming without you having reached out, then you need to be more skeptical.
Okay. Thank you. And I think your answers are really resonating with everyone. People are appreciating the detailed answers. I'll do maybe 2 more questions and then let you go because I know we're getting towards the end of the hour and a half. If you've ended up somehow on a list and you get a bunch of spam, or if you go to the Have I Been Pawned website and you see that you were compromised, does changing your password remedy this? Or is there a way to get off some lists? What are the ways that people can try to kind of get back to where they were?
Just minimizing the number of lists, because let's face it, we're all on dozens of lists. Luckily, we're not hit by all of these lists at the same time, but we know instinctively that we're on so many lists. Just the fact that we're signing up to accounts means we're literally putting ourselves on somebody's list of users. So if, for example, let's say that you go to Have I Been Pwned, and on Have I Been Pwned, you punch in, why don't I share my screen just for fun?
Sure.
Do you see my blue screen that says Have I Been Pwned?
Yep, we do.
So I will take one email address that I know was stolen by criminals a quarter century ago, and it's Claudiu@yahoo.com. You'll be shocked by just how many times it has been compromised. 49. So this this email address was originally stolen from me because Yahoo got hacked, and it got hacked in such a major way that their entire systems were commanded by hackers. And so I kept on going back in there and changing the password, but it was changing from inside Yahoo. So I had no ability to prevent it. And so I watched this happen in real time, and then I just gave up on it. And I've been monitoring it for so many years. And you can pretty much guess what happened to it, because you see that it's been on a lot of lists for online gaming. And so whoever stole it has been playing a lot of online games, whatever Neopets is, and a variety of these interesting things. Also interesting is the fact that we don't recognize many of them, like these envelopes. So these are simply lists of lists. So not only are these lists available publicly, but there's always somebody who goes and creates an even bigger list by amalgamating all of this stuff and then goes and puts it back out online. And many people have access to it. So you're on even more lists than you think you're on. So if you happen to be on one of these red screens, the one thing, easy thing to do is for the sites that you do recognize, like, for example, Adobe here, you go and change your password, right? Make sure that you choose a password that has not been used before, and make sure that it's long, and store it in a password database. That's basically the main thing that you can do physically. What you should do if you recognize a Canadian company on the list is to call them up and say, there was a privacy breach potentially. And I see here at the bottom that not only was my email address taken, but also password hints and passwords. Well, that's definitely a privacy breach. What's been done about this? And if you get a satisfactory answer from the company, then that's great. If you get no satisfactory answer from the company, you go to the Privacy Commissioner's office, which is a handy dandy website at opc.on.ca, and file a privacy complaint. And let the experts investigate on your behalf to see what the harm might have been. And in so doing, you've done pretty much everything you can do aside from avoiding the use of a generic email address when you give them out to sites. I always recommend tagging them somehow. For example, when I give out my email address to Adobe, I will submit something like this.
Very smart.
All right, so that way, if I'm told that this email address was compromised and it looks like it came from a Facebook list, but it says Claudiu plus Adobe, I know that Adobe has sold it to Facebook and then Facebook lost it, right? Is click here, and you will get notified in the future so that you don't have to keep visiting this website when your email address appears on any compromised lists. So yeah, next time you visit, make sure you hit notify me.
And explain
That's
why people
wonderful.
can trust this site, because I think a lot of people are like, "What? Wait a minute, I'm not supposed to give out my email address. Why would I give it to this site?"
This website was created by a highly trusted professional, Microsoft professional, who's world renowned, Troy Hunt, and it's one of the highest, most useful tools in the security world. So we trust this website implicitly. And so, as you can tell, it's very rare for me to actually recommend a site or a product. This is one of the ones that we do recommend. However, I am still not likely to punch in my password into this password strength checker. I will, if you want to check the strength of your password, punch in a password with the same length as your password, but not your actual password. And that will tell you, for example, if I type in password STAR, because it could be used anywhere. And so that gives you a hint that something that is 12 characters long is relatively unique. Now, I do recommend using extra characters and numbers, but I literally just typed in password. I may have typed it with a capital letter. Aha, yes. So that was my mistake. I made it extra hard by capitalizing the word password. When you punch it in lowercase, it clearly shows you that it has been seen 27 times as part of previous data breaches. So it's a fun thing to do. I still don't want to use it to punch in my actual or one of my actual passwords, but it'll give you a lot of insight into just how weak the password is. So don't use password as a password, and don't necessarily even type it in backwards, because people have already thought of that. I leave it to you to punch that in.
Thank you so much. And I think we're at the end of our session. So Claudiu and Debra, thank you so much for today. I think this really helped relieve a lot of anxiety for people, you know, kind of hearing how the whole thing works and is understood from the other side of the fence really kind of helps, you know, demystify things.
Yeah.
And
My pleasure.
Thank you. Speaking of, we were asked, how do we know that we can trust your survey? Very good question. Thank you. You've learned a lot today. We kind of leave it up to you to decide whether you think we are trustworthy or not. But if you think we are, and which we are, we would encourage you to let us know how we did today, and also share thoughts and suggestions for future webinars you would like us to host. Rayanne, I think you can activate that on the screen right now, if possible.
Yeah, and I just wanted to let people know that we don't ask for the Survey Monkey is what we use for evaluation. So in that evaluation, we don't ask for your name, our phone number, or any of that kind of stuff. So it's anonymous.
That's great.
When you do provide us feedback on these sessions. So
That's great.
We don't know who you are. I do have just a couple quick polling questions if people are still online. Just asking if
yeah, we still have 124 people online, it looks.
Okay, so I'm just going to launch, just asking
but
people.
We need to share your screen.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Oops.
There it is.
In terms of just today, just asking a polling question, if you learn more, obviously today is around prevention of cyber scams. So we're just asking people's feedback. This is just an addition, in case you don't get a chance to do the survey, just to getting some feedback for that. I do want to share my screen though, because we do have a couple other webinars that are coming up for people to participate in. So next week we actually have one on basic finances or basic banking finances, and we have ABC's financial literacy that will be providing that. So if you, it is Financial Literacy Month, which is why we're doing many of these sessions, just to protect your money and your finances. And then we are having one more on AI. This will be the third one we've talking about cyber security on ChatGPT. And it'll be talking about just how to use that and navigating that system as well. So please take note. And we're just doing the evaluation. Again, if you want to follow or if need more information from us, please reach out to us in the future. And there are contact information for both Benedict and myself. I apologize. I have a cold, so that's why Benedict's been doing a little talking today. This will be the last polling question, and then we will thank our guests and we thank everybody for all the great questions. I've learned, I'm going to have to go back and listen to the recording because I couldn't keep up to all your responses because there's so much great information and resources. I did put them in the chat box. Anything, the links that we've shared, we will post that on our websites as well with the recording, so people have access to that as well. And just when I was doing a search on your KnowledgeFlow website, there's so much information. I just typed in passwords trying to find that report, and there was many documents. So just encourage everybody to go and check those out. So thank you, Benedict, for taking over today as well and co-hosting, and for both Debra and Claudia.
My pleasure.
We look forward to seeing everybody at our next session. Thank you. And our ASL.
Thanks for having us. That's great.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Thanks.